The room buzzed with reporters clamoring for attention, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. Suddenly, a voice cut through the noise like a knife slicing silence. "Sir." Every sound stopped instantly. Pens froze mid-sentence. Cameras ceased clicking. Reporters exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to react. Aides shifted nervously, whispering into earpieces but offering no solution. Donald Trump stood at the podium, his mouth slightly open, caught off guard. For once, all eyes weren't on him. They were on the man who had spoken. Trump didn't respond immediately. His fingers twitched toward his tie, adjusting it out of habit. He blinked slowly, his jaw tightening as he processed the interruption. Who was this man? Why did his presence feel so unsettling? His mind raced, searching for control, for a way to regain the upper hand. But nothing came. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Aides whispered urgently, though their voices barely registered over the deafening quiet. The man stepped closer, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Sir," he said again, louder this time. "Do you even know what it's like to have nothing?" The question landed like a punch, raw and unfiltered. It wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't kind either. It was honest, brutal in its simplicity. Trump felt his chest tighten. Did he know what it was like to have nothing? Of course not. Yet something about the way the man asked made him pause. All eyes were on him now. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready. Aides whispered frantically, but no one moved to intervene. And still, Trump said nothing. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself had stopped. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, the veteran took another step closer, leaving the room, and the story, leaning on the edge of resolution. The room buzzed with an energy that felt almost electric. The hum of cameras clicking filled the air, flashes lighting up the space like strobes. Reporters adjusted their ties and smoothed their blazers, the faint scent of polished wood mingling with the sharp tang of cologne. Overhead, an oversized American flag hung limply against the wall, its red stripes glowing under harsh spotlights. Microphones gleamed on podiums, catching the light as if they were part of the spectacle themselves. It was a scene of grandeur, designed to impress. Yet beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension, a sense that something unexpected could disrupt the carefully curated order at any moment. And then he appeared. At first, no one noticed him. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his presence almost swallowed by the opulence around him. But slowly, heads began to turn. His tattered jacket bore patches stitched together haphazardly. Dirt smudged across his weathered face. His boots were worn down to the soles, caked with mud from unseen streets. He didn't belong here, not in this world of polished shoes and tailored suits. Whispers rippled through the room. Some attendees leaned closer to one another, murmuring nervously. Others avoided eye contact altogether, as if looking directly at him might make them complicit in whatever disruption he was about to cause. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Here was a man who seemed to carry the weight of struggle on his shoulders. Standing amidst a sea of privilege, security guards exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or wait for instructions. Reporters paused mid-note-taking, pens hovering above paper as curiosity mixed with apprehension. A palpable unease settled over the room. Everyone sensed it. Something significant was about to happen. But what? No one knew. The veteran's steady gaze moved across the crowd, lingering briefly on Donald Trump before locking on to someone else entirely. The silence grew heavier, anticipation crackling like static electricity. Whatever this man had come to say or do, it was clear it wouldn't be ignored, and as he took a small step forward, the room collectively held its breath. Donald Trump stood tall behind the podium, his presence commanding every inch of the room. He adjusted his tie with practiced ease, a gesture that seemed almost automatic, as if to remind everyone of his authority. His eyes scanned the crowd, sharp and calculating, exuding confidence and control. But then he saw him, James. For a fleeting moment, something shifted. His jaw tightened slightly, betraying unease. His hands twitched toward his tie again, a nervous habit revealing internal tension. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a crack in the armor of the man who prided himself on being unshakable. Trump tried to steady himself, forcing his expression back into one of calm authority. Yet the weight of James's gaze lingered, unsettling him in ways he couldn't yet articulate. James stood at the edge of the crowd, his presence stark against the polished backdrop. His face was weathered, lined with stories untold, each wrinkle etched by years of hardship. His jacket bore patches stitched together haphazardly, frayed edges speaking of battles fought and losses endured. Yet it was his eyes that drew attention, eyes that carried both pain and determination. They hinted at deeper layers beneath his disheveled exterior, a man who had once served but now felt forgotten. "James," someone whispered nearby, giving him a name, humanizing him further. Despite the intimidating environment, he held his ground, unafraid. There was an unshakable resolve in the way he stood, shoulders squared, meeting Trump's gaze directly. It wasn't defiance, it was courage. And in that moment, James became more than just a figure. He became a symbol of struggle and resilience. The air between them crackled with tension. Trump tried to maintain composure, projecting strength even as uncertainty gnawed at him internally. He wrestled with whether to dismiss James or engage fully, torn between maintaining his image and addressing the moment authentically. James, however, remained unflinching. His raw honesty and moral courage commanded a different kind of power, one that transcended societal authority. Though Trump held the stage, it was James who held the room's attention. Their gazes locked, a silent battle of wills unfolding. Trump felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, forcing him to confront emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel. And still, James didn't waver. If anything, his resolve seemed to grow stronger, challenging Trump to step out from behind the podium and meet him on equal ground. The dynamic between them was electric, charged with unspoken questions and possibilities. As the silence stretched, readers were left curious. How would this encounter unfold? What would happen next? James's voice cut through the air, sharp and unyielding. "Do you really care about people like me?" The room froze. Cameras stopped clicking mid-flash. Reporters froze mid-note, pens hovering above paper. All eyes turned to James and Trump, the collective breath of the audience held in suspended anticipation. It was a question that demanded more than words. It demanded truth. The gravity of it settled over everyone like a heavy fog, pressing down on their chests. Some swallowed hard, others exchanged glances. But no one dared to break the silence. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The only sound was the faint hum of tension buzzing softly in the background. Trump stepped back slightly, visibly caught off guard. His jaw tightened again, a muscle twitching beneath his skin. His hand instinctively moved toward his tie, adjusting it with nervous precision. He hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't come. Instead, he locked eyes with James, trying to read something deeper in his gaze. What did this man want from him? What answer could possibly satisfy such a raw, unfiltered question? Aides exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to intervene. One whispered urgently into an earpiece, but their voices were drowned out by the deafening silence. Another shifted uncomfortably, clearly uneasy about the unscripted moment unfolding before them. Trump's mind raced. He wrestled with whether to deflect, dismiss, or engage fully. Each option carried its own weight, its own risk. And still he said nothing, leaving the room, and himself hanging on the edge of resolution. The audience began to stir, their unease palpable. Some reporters leaned forward, eagerly, pens poised, ready to capture whatever came next. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the emotional tension crackling in the air. Murmurs rippled softly through the crowd. Whispers of disbelief, sympathy, or skepticism filled the space between moments. "What will he say?" one muttered under their breath. Another shook their head, murmuring, "This is unprecedented." The longer Trump remained silent, the more the anticipation grew. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for him to break the spell. Every second stretched further, heavier, until it felt unbearable, and still he didn't speak. Instead, his eyes stayed locked on James, searching for something, anything that might guide him forward. The suspense built, layer upon layer, until it became almost unbearable. Everyone was left hanging, desperate to know what would happen next. Trump's voice finally broke the silence, but it was hesitant, measured, as if each word carried the weight of the moment. He spoke slowly, deliberately choosing his phrasing, pausing often to gather his thoughts. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie again, a nervous habit that betrayed his internal struggle. His brow furrowed deeply, the lines on his face etched with tension. This wasn't like any speech he'd given before. It felt raw, unscripted, and achingly human. The room hung on every syllable, the anticipation thick enough to touch. It was clear this wasn't just another answer. It was something deeper, something personal. And yet, he hesitated, searching for the right way to begin. As he spoke, Trump's mind drifted back to a memory. A visit to Arlington National Cemetery years ago. The image came to him vividly, rows upon rows of pristine white headstones stretching endlessly under a somber gray sky. He could almost feel the crisp air biting at his skin, hear the distant echo of footsteps against the solemn ground. The silence there had been overwhelming, pressing down on him like a physical weight. He remembered standing still, staring at the sea of markers, each one representing a life lost in service. The enormity of their sacrifice hit him then, leaving him momentarily paralyzed by the sheer scale of it all. It was a moment that had stayed with him, lodged deep in his memory, a reminder of the cost of freedom, a burden too heavy for words. Then there was Ryan. Trump recalled meeting him, or rather, hearing about him. Ryan had been young, full of dreams, eager to serve. He'd joined the military with a sense of duty that inspired those around him. But Ryan's story ended too soon. Killed in action, his name now etched into one of those cold stones at Arlington. Trump remembered sitting across from Ryan's mother during a private meeting. Her grief was palpable, her tears falling silently as she shared stories of her son. The boy who loved baseball, who dreamed of becoming a teacher, who always called her on Sundays. Her pain had left a lasting impression on him, a haunting reminder of the human cost behind the headlines. He'd wanted to say something meaningful, something comforting, but no words had come. That helplessness had stayed with him ever since. Back in the present, Trump admitted what he'd never dared to say publicly. "I want to help everyone," he began, his voice faltering slightly. "But I can't fix everything." He paused, struggling to articulate emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel. His polished persona cracked further. His hands shook as he adjusted his tie yet again, his breath shaky as he exhaled. The audience watched intently, sensing they were witnessing something rare. Some leaned forward, pens poised, while others simply stared, captivated by the vulnerability unfolding before them. It was a side of him few had seen. A man grappling with his own limitations, torn between the desire to make a difference and the harsh reality of what he couldn't change. This was not the Trump they knew, the confident, commanding figure who thrived in the spotlight. This was someone else entirely, raw, honest, and undeniably human. Tears welled up in his eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. A shaky exhale followed a particularly difficult sentence, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowd reacted silently, their awe palpable. They realized they weren't just hearing words, they were seeing genuine emotion unfold in real time. For a fleeting moment, the barriers between leader and listener dissolved. What remained was a shared understanding, a connection forged through honesty and vulnerability. James stood still, his weathered face softening as tears welled up in his eyes. His voice trembled as he whispered, "Thank you. Just thank you." The simplicity of his words carried a weight far greater than any grand speech. They were quiet, sincere, and deeply human, a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere of the room. His shoulders relaxed slightly, as if an invisible burden had been lifted. The tension in his expression melted away, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude. It was a moment that spoke volumes without needing to shout, drawing attention to the humanity beneath the surface. Without thinking, Trump stepped down from the podium. The act itself felt symbolic, a breaking of barriers between authority and vulnerability. He extended his hand to James, an unscripted gesture that surprised even himself. His tie was slightly askew, his steps hesitant yet deliberate, signaling a departure from his usual polished demeanor. The audience held its breath, unsure what would happen next. Some exchanged glances, others leaned forward, sensing that something profound was unfolding before them. For Trump, it wasn't about protocol anymore. It was about connection. He wanted to bridge the gap between them, to show James that his words hadn't fallen on deaf ears. Then it happened. Trump pulled James into a brief hug. The room collectively gasped, the unexpectedness of the moment catching everyone off guard, including Trump himself. His arms trembled slightly, betraying the depth of emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. James clutched at his jacket, holding on as if clinging to hope itself. The ripple effect was immediate. The audience erupted into spontaneous applause, hands clapping in unison, filling the space with sound. Some wiped away tears, while others covered their mouths in disbelief. Muffled sobs mingled with sighs of relief, creating a symphony of raw emotion. It was cathartic, not just for James and Trump, but for everyone watching. Behind them, the American flag rippled slightly, as if stirred by an unseen breeze. It was a subtle detail, yet it carried meaning, a metaphor for unity and shared humanity. For a fleeting second, the room transformed. It no longer felt like a political stage. It felt like a sanctuary. The walls seemed to dissolve, leaving only the connection between two men who, despite their differences, had found common ground. As the moment lingered, it left an indelible mark on everyone present. Themes of empathy and redemption resonated deeply, reminding them of the power of vulnerability and understanding. Trump's voice was steady but quiet, each word carrying the weight of his earlier vulnerability. "We're all fighting battles no one else can see," he said, pausing to let the truth settle over the room. "But maybe we don't need to fight alone." The simplicity of his message struck a chord. It wasn't grand or polished. It was raw and deeply human, reflecting the struggles he'd shared earlier about feeling helpless in the face of sacrifice. He spoke slowly, deliberately, allowing every syllable to sink in. His tone carried conviction, yet there was a softness to it, as if he were speaking not just to the crowd, but to himself as well. This realization tied back to his earlier admission, grounding the moment in authenticity and emotional resonance. Trump continued, his words shifting from personal reflection to a broader call for action. "Look past what divides us," he urged, his voice firm but gentle, "and find strength in what unites us." The audience reacted subtly. Some nodded in agreement, others exchanged glances, murmuring softly as they began to internalize his message. He connected individual acts of kindness to a larger sense of unity, making the abstract tangible. "Every small gesture matters," he added, his tone emphasizing the ripple effect of compassion. It was clear that this wasn't just rhetoric. It was an invitation, a challenge to see beyond surface differences and embrace shared humanity. Trump brought the theme full circle, tying empathy to patriotism and service. This country was built not just by heroes in uniform, he said, his voice swelling with pride, but by ordinary people willing to stand up for each other. The statement bridged James's sacrifice as a veteran with Trump's role as a leader, creating a cohesive narrative arc. It reinforced the idea that true greatness lies in collective effort and mutual support. His words resonated deeply, reminding everyone of the values that bind them together, a shared commitment to something greater than themselves. As Trump concluded, he glanced at James one last time, their eyes meeting briefly. The look was fleeting but powerful, symbolizing hope and renewed purpose. The final thought lingered in the air, encouraging the audience to reflect on their own capacity for kindness and connection. "Maybe we don't need to fight alone," echoed softly in their minds, a reminder to carry the message forward into their own lives. Trump ignored the protests of security as he personally escorted James out of the room. It was an uncharacteristic move, one that spoke volumes about the significance of the moment. His hand rested briefly on James's shoulder, a gesture both simple and profound. They walked side by side in silence, their steps slow and deliberate. The quiet between them carried more weight than words ever could. As they reached the doorway, Trump paused for a moment, his gaze lingering on James. This wasn't just an exit. It was the closing of a chapter, though its impact would linger long after they parted ways. James stopped at the threshold, turning to face Trump one last time. His voice was soft but steady as he said, "I'll never forget this day." The sincerity in his tone was unmistakable, filled with gratitude and hope. Trump nodded slowly, visibly moved. His eyes reflected a mix of humility and resolve, acknowledging the depth of what had transpired between them. In that fleeting exchange, their connection solidified, a bond forged through vulnerability and mutual respect. Though their paths would diverge, the moment would remain etched in both their memories. As Trump turned back toward the chaos of his world, something had shifted within him. He carried himself differently now, with renewed purpose. The encounter with James had left an indelible mark, subtly altering his perspective. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was enough to remind him of the power of human connection and shared humanity. Cameras captured James walking away, his figure blending into the bustling city streets. Overhead, the American flag fluttered proudly against a clear blue sky, a symbol of unity, resilience, and enduring hope. The image lingered, leaving readers with a sense of closure while evoking lingering emotions. It was a reminder that even amidst division, moments of connection can inspire lasting change.